The journey from Sangerhausen to Waltershausen takes us through many historic towns and villages. But for us, this is a journey from one sound to another. While Hildebrandt and Silbermann created organs with colourful and interesting stops, they were essentially conventional. But what we find in Waltershausen is more exotic and perhaps eccentric. The fine Baroque church was built before the Frauenkirche in Dresden, and it has some similarities, not least that it uses Baroque forms in service of a Lutheran building. The organ was built by Trost, who built an organ played by Bach in Altenburg. It's a very different style of organ building with an emphasis on colour, not on chorus or volume. Organs were becoming more orchestral. They were becoming less just about choruses and set colours and more about exploring a different sort of universe of tones. And eventually we see this lead into the 19th century and ultimately, of course, to the symphonic organ of the early 20th century. And its roots were here in the Thuringian organ. We also know that Agricola admired the viol de gamba of Trost. Let's have a listen. And again, you can hear in the pipe speech almost that sort of 18th century bowed sound where the attack is not immediate, but the player is forced, if you like, to respond to the sound and just give space for the note to settle.
Ja. 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 Ja, okay, ready.
As court organist in Weimar, Johann Sebastian Bach mainly had to train his skills as an organist and interpreter, and so this was the basis for his fame as virtuoso organist. In his compositional style, he had so far collected many influences, especially from northern Germany and from the mid-German Pachelbel school, Johann Pachelbel being the teacher of his brother Johann Christoph. And in 1713, the young Duke of Sachsen-Weimar came back from a journey around Europe, and he had been to Amsterdam and probably heard the blind organist Jan Jacob de Graaf in the Nieuwe Kerk, who played transcriptions of Italian violin concertos. And so he brought back a large amount of musical scores and asked his organist Bach to do the same. And Bach not only transcribed concerti by Antonio Vivaldi, he really adopted this style to his own compositions.
Concerto di Giovanni Ernesto appropriato al organo di Johann Sebastian Bach. It's a worn manuscript. It has been used a lot, and it doesn't have a cover. It's a G major one by the Duke of Sachsen-Weimar, Johann Ernst, Giovanni Ernesto. And with this piece, we enter a period of Bach's life in which he absorbed music of Italian composers, which led him to a totally new style, the concerto style. And this was then after it. The concerto style was put into every form. It was the game changer of Bach's music. Since long, we know that there was a trip by this Giovanni Ernesto, Johann Ernst, to the Netherlands, and afterwards a lot of manuscripts came to Weimar. But only 2 years ago, there's a young Polish musicologist, and he found out that you could buy in Halle, even before this trip, you could buy these famous Vivaldi concertos. So we have the strong intention now that you could date the manuscripts of the Vivaldi arrangements even 2 years earlier. And in these pieces you see a much more lighter Bach. You see that he's full of ideas and full of bright and light music, and perhaps you can also say that in the same period in Weimar he was changing music manuscripts of French style with his friend and relative Johann Gottfried Walter, who was a town organist in Weimar and who possessed a lot of music from French organists and clavecinists of Paris. And French music is much more concentrated and it's not as light as this Italian style. So we have both sides in this Weimar period of Bach's music.
This concerto is something of a curiosity. Only one movement survives in the organ transcription, and we don't have any sign of the original by Bach's employer, Prince Johann Ernst. I wonder how much he changed, how much he strengthened. Certainly when Bach arranged Vivaldi's concerti for organ, he improved on various aspects of counterpoint and voice leading and one or two other details as well. And it's interesting that he never returned in his own music to quite such an obvious Italianate concerto form in the organ music. This piece has more manual changes than any other Bach piece, all notated very carefully. What else might we consider about expression in this piece? Well, the Italians were very keen on the idea of oratio, this idea about how you declaim a piece, how you issue it rhetorically is as important as the bare bones. And I think it's not too cruel to say that if one is completely straight with Ernst's original, maybe it's not the most scintillating musical experience. And so the performer might well consider, as I do, groppi, tirate, those are fast scales and decorations, tremoletti, little trills, and so on, to try and make it feel like an Italian string work. We know this was very much in vogue in 17th and early 18th century Germany. Also, I think it reminds us of the colours of the German organ, that this sort of string music can fit very well on an organ like this. It might not sound absolutely like 18th century strings, it's not a synthesizer, but it does give that sort of sound and that general impression of playing this music on appropriate gut strings and with bows of the time. So altogether, this slight piece represents something actually more significant in the expressive musical life of J.S. Bach.